This is the headstock assembly of the XL lathe, which is a very substantial piece of kit. I've cleaned it, painted it and reassembled it. I'll just strip it down now so you can see how it comes to bits, and I'll just take some measurements off it which you might find interesting. It's certainly the heaviest of anything I've taken apart for a while. There's a dust protector on both ends. There's a dust protector at the front, which is just a simple cap which pushes on. I haven't drilled and tapped these, they were in plain holes, which is a bit unusual. I bought some new drip feed oilers, just small ones. The oiling system on this is slightly different to what I've seen before. I'll show you that in a minute. So if I just take this apart now, I'll take the shaft out. Now this is slightly tricky to get the order of everything together. Now you can see I've left it so that slightly moves, and the reason for that is where these screws are, there's inside there, just get a torch so that you can see inside, there's a set screw in here inside that secures onto the shaft. I'll unscrew these collars off here. That's one collar that's just dropped off the thread. I've taken the two set screws out of there. Right, I've unscrewed that so that the two collars are no longer on the screw thread. So that will enable me now to extract the shaft. So I've got these two collars here to hold while and this and the cone pulley. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to take the two screw collars, take this section out, and that's disassembled, and you can see the very nice thrust ball race in the front, and the condition of the bearings is absolutely perfect. And these outer screw threads may come off, and this one, well, it's just possible to see, but in that part there is a felt wiper. So any liquid that gets, any grease, any oil rather, that gets through, gets soaked up in that, which is a nice touch, very substantial, and it has two pins to unscrew, but I have not taken it apart. The condition of the felt is good enough that I don't need to do anything about it. This is the adjustment collar for the back bearing. And then there's two similar screw-on collars, one for the front second one for the front. Now that's the headstock, so you can see the bearings, which are typical bronze bearings, but they are really robust, strongly made ones, and in the middle of them there's where underneath the oiler sits is a little flap which hangs down, that's hinged and sits on top of the bearing, which provides a little bit of contact between the oil that drips down and the bearing itself. Whether you can see this, quite difficult to show. There's a little hinged flap, and similarly there's a very tiny one on that side as well. Again, that's so small, I don't know if I can show it really at all. Oh, that might be a little bit better. I've got that. You might be able to, yes, I think that should be visible. So if I put my little finger up. So that's how the oiling is done. And as I mentioned, there's a seal at the front, at the back, to stop the oil coming out of the back bearing. Really, this shouldn't be flooded with oil after it's been run. And I think I haven't taken the bronze bushes out because I didn't want to disturb the bearings, as they were in nice condition. There's around the outside, I think there's a felt bush, so it's very well thought out, and the bearings are 2 1/4 inches long at the back and 1 1/4 diameter, and the front one is 2 1/2 long and 1 1/2 inches diameter. And underneath the bottom of the casting, I notice that there's a drain plug, and underneath the casting, just underneath there, but there's no drain arrangement in here in the casting for it to drip into the bottom of the casting. Just that little flap that sits over the top, and the oil ways which are ground in or carved into the bronze. So the position of these 2 bushes can be moved either way to tighten them up or loosen them, and they've got cuts about halfway through these cuts here, so that when you tighten it up it will actually squash it. And I dare say, I haven't checked, let's just check now, that they're tapered. No, I thought they might have been tapered, but it doesn't look like it, so they just squash. Unless there's a tapered section. Yes, there might be a tapered section that's on the where that shoulder is there. So very nicely made headstock, very substantial, last for years and years. And bearing in mind this was made in 1940, the bearings are probably in as good a condition as they were when it was first put together. It's quite a surprise, really. This is the belt drive pulley wheel from the XL lathe, and it revealed slightly unusual arrangement that I wasn't expecting. There are two massive ball races here which run inside the steps in here, and it's lubricated by a screw hole there, and the whole of this assembly is bolted up against the here on those 4 bolts into the headstock at the tail end, and that secures it in that position so that all of the weight of the forces acting on the pulley wheel are taken on the back face of the lathe, of the headstock, and there's just sufficient clearance at the front so that it rides clear of the shaft which runs through here, and then it's joined onto the shaft via this collar, and the collar fits so it doesn't roll off. The collar fits in here, and there's a keyway that sits in here. That holds it in place, with these screws here holding the keyways in, and these 2 screws here on each side are up against the shaft. So it's a very unusual arrangement. I'm not quite sure why they adopted it, but anyway, it is massive construction. These bearings have been on here since 1940, and I'm not inclined to change them. They seem to be perfectly satisfactory. There's very little play, none in that smaller one, just a little bit in the back one, but not sufficient to make me think I'd want to try and find a replacement bearing, which I may well fail because they're very unusual size, I'm sure. They're absolutely massive. So I will put all this back together. These were a very tight fit inside the cone, and when I put this back I shall heat this up so that it hopefully will drop in a bit easier than it came out. If I wanted to take the bearings off, there's 2 points there that you could put a special tool in to rotate that sleeve and take that off. There's a thread inside there. But again, as I said, no point in taking it apart. I have given it a washout with some paraffin, and I've oiled it with some fresh oil, so I think I'm inclined just to put it all back in together. But it is unusual, and I thought I'd just take a photograph of it and show you how it was all fitted together. Now the other thing is I'll bring in the headstock so that you can see how it fits in. Right, the assembly is really a reverse of how I took it apart. Right, now to reassemble. Very easy to leave out the drive belt when you're putting this together. I've noticed one or two other people on the internet who've been assembling things have forgotten. It's quite easy to do and very irritating. Right, now the best way to put this in is to insert this pulley first. Having done that, hold it at the front and put the two lock washers in, and then insert the shaft. And I've oiled everything up, so it should be nice and oiled on the bearing surfaces. Let's got that into there. So the next thing to do is to start to get, let's turn this round a bit so you can see what I'm doing. The next thing to do is to try and get the two washers started on the thread behind here, and I've got doing this with my fingers rather than with gloves on, because it's much easier to feel what's happening. Right, that's got the first one started. Let's got the second one on. Now, having got those two on, I have to just adjust them further on so that I can then see the holes in the spindle and line everything up, so I can then that one's visible through that hole and that one's visible through that hole, so that's the two set screws go in there. So two set screws in, and there's a patch screw that just second one in. And then need to look round the back here. There's a slot in here, and if the rear bearing needs adjusting, you can move it with a Tommy bar through those holes there, but as it is I've done it up tight, so all I need to do now is just to put this bearing cap on and then do that up tight. Now the next job is to screw on the back bearing that sits inside the cone pulley. So just insert these into here. Then the cover goes on. And the thread protector. And then two oilers. And finally just the protector at the front, and that's the unit fully assembled.